Welcome back to the On Business podcast. With tons of experience in different industries in Canada and the United States, Danielle and Brandon give you real talk, no nonsense expert advice about running and owning successful companies. Here's your host, Danielle Jenkins and Brandon White.
Hey, Danielle, what's happening?
Hey, Brandon, how are you?
Well, I'd be better if your mic was working today, but but I know it's not. We are talking about our experience in being in, I'm hesitant to say this, but they're called masterminds, but I haven't been in a quote unquote mastermind. It's been more like a founders group or what we started in business school called the Entrepreneur Dinner Club. How about you?
I've been a part of the same thing. They would be considered mastermind groups, but we called them accountability groups. And honestly, I love them. I value the experience, the accountability obviously behind it. I value it so much. I've been a part of a few different accountability groups, still am a part of them for $1 Million Women, CEO Women, things like that. And honestly, they've been such a part of my success, whether it's a part of, my company's success or just me as a person. I've grown in both ways, and having these groups so valuable to me. And I just wanted to share today my experience, your experience, and why they're so important for any successful business owner and entrepreneur.
How have your groups worked?
So we'll call them accountability groups on my end. So my accountability groups, a part of them, usually about 10 to 12 women. Again, you have to be $1 million plus. And I'm not talking, net worth by any means. I'm talking your company or your brand or whatever business you're doing.
It's revenue-based.
Revenue-based, yes. So you have to be a part of that because, as we know, problems change or issues change or challenges change as your revenue changes. So, 0 to 500,000, you have similar problems. 500,000 to $1 million, a little bit different. And then $1 million plus, you're dealing with a whole different ballgame of challenges. So being a part of something like the one group, which is $1 million plus woman, the structure of the accountability group was amazing, and I still value it. I still love it. We do it once a month. And when you come in, you talk about what is happening now. You get like 3 minutes and you talk about current issues that you're facing, what is happening in your business /brand /company right now. And so when you've shared that, then everybody gets a chance to give you insight, maybe experiences, maybe some advice based on their failures, their wins, their successes. And everybody chats about it together, helping these 10 to 12 women. And I really like that because everybody has different experiences, because everybody has, yes, $1 million plus brand or revenue in their business, but everybody has experienced something, whether it's a difficult client, like we've talked about on here, a difficult employee, branding, lawsuits, whatever the issues /challenges could be, we can all give insight to that because we've all went through them once you hit that kind of revenue. So that's what we start with. And then by the end of it, everybody is held to an accountability task. So the ringleader, we'll call it the ringleader, or the leader of the group, they go around asking what everybody's accountability task is that they should or, work towards by the next meeting. So after everybody has talked about those challenges, everybody's given insight to what can help, what can benefit, their experiences, etc. Get your brain spinning. Then everybody has to report their accountability task, whether that is health, mental, in your business, whatever it may be. My challenge right now is lack of staff. My accountability task is to hire 3 new staff by next meeting. And that you get held to that. And then by the next meeting, you have to share if you have met that accountability task. And when you are around 10 to 12 or even sometimes 15 $1 million women, you definitely don't want to let them down and say that you haven't done it or even tried to work on it. And if you haven't met it, you need to at least share that you've tried. I've held 10 interviews. All of them were useless. You've tried, you've done what you should have done towards that task. You may not have met your goal, but at least you tried. So it does keep you on track. It does keep you accountable. And that is the most important thing, because we all have busy lives. We all have so much going on. Work can make you work 20 hours a day, sometimes without even taking a sip of water. So when you know that you have to share this by next meeting, it definitely keeps you on track. That's for sure.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking about, I was reading some, probably makes me sound geeky if you're just listening to this for the first time, but it's actually true. I am geeky. Is reading some scientific studies on goal attainment. And as it turns out, there was a meta-analysis, which is sort of seen as the definitive type work as it relates to research at that moment, because it goes back and looks at all of the research on that topic. It then filters those out to more comprehensive studies with larger sets of groups. So if you had someone who did a study with 5 or 7 people, that's just not going to be as statistically significant as a study that had 1,000 people over 4 years. Mm-hmm. So that's the sort of meta-analysis. And the punchline is, which I'll save everybody a long-winded answer, is that when you write your goal down and tell it in public meaning this doesn't mean you need to post it on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, Facebook, whatever it is, but when you publicly, outside of your immediate circle, meaning your significant partner, whoever that is, it's sort of outside of that, is that you are more likely to attain that goal. And what you just described is exactly what that study sort of, well, it doesn't sort of, it validates that that's what works. So I think that it is important when you have these goals. And I experiment on myself all the time, had these goals where I just keep it to myself, and then 3 weeks later I'm not doing it and I'm wondering why. And there's 100 reasons. There's always 100 reasons why you didn't do it. I was laughing when you said you can go through the whole day without drinking water, because actually yesterday when I was trying to finish writing this book that I'm working on, I think I went 4 hours without water, and I knew I did, but I just didn't want to get up. I just wanted to keep writing because I was in that state and I didn't want to move it. So that's actually true. But I think that there's a lot to having a group, in addition to the other thing that you said, which is what I've found, is that just having, I think you said when you have 20 other women in the room, or people, it doesn't matter whether they're women or not, that have $1 million plus businesses, there's a higher standard in there, and a momentum or energy that comes from that almost lifts you up into a place that is otherwise hard to get to. It's sort of like jumping on your Peloton and with no music, and then all of a sudden you turn on AC/DC and your cadence goes up, and you gain 5 miles an hour, and your watts is up 100 watts. I mean, that would be the analogy I would give to what happens in these groups. Do you agree?
I 100% agree. And I was thinking similar to that. It's like going to a regular kind of one of those like life motivation things, or you look at something like Tony Robbins, where he's making you like jump and scream and arms flying before you even think about it, because it just gives you that motivation and that extra pump up.
I think there's just something also being in a room as a founder or a CEO. You're generally, I'll say, you don't want to be the smartest person in the room, but you are up there as it relates to your company because you're leading it. You came up with the idea, you're leading that team, and you're at the tip of the spear, so to speak. And then you find yourself and you put yourself in this situation where you might not be at the tip of the spear. There's probably someone else making more revenue than you, making more money than you, and it just changes your mindset and elevates you, because in general, founders, CEOs are type A in general, not everybody, but there has to be some sort of internal motivation to basically get you to do something and turn nothing into something and then something into a business. So there's just inherently that thing. And it's like turning on AC/DC and watching your watts go up on the Peloton. I mean, that's what happens. And then there's this, you have to publicly say what your goal is. I mean, you're not going to come back to that meeting. Or if you do, you're not going to come back to many of them with that failure. You're eventually going to show up, and you're going to show up whether you're embarrassed or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. It's almost that, I think you said this, you don't want to let those other people down, as weird as that sounds.
It's true. And on top of not letting them down, you don't want, it is embarrassing, because unless something major happens in your life, unfortunately, I don't know, something unfortunate happens, an awful event. Really, a lot of these goals and things that you need to work on in your business are attainable. You should be doing them, especially if you know you need to be doing them. So, to show up there and go, I had 4 events every weekend, and so I couldn't work on this. I couldn't work on my branding, whatever it may be. Because of that, they're going to think you're pathetic. I mean, those are just excuses for not doing what you need to do to continue to grow. I mean, that's why we're a part of these groups, is to hold you accountable, to give you insight, to give you experiences from other successful people, but to grow. We want to increase revenue. We want to make ourselves better, personal development, make our companies better, make our leadership better, all of those things. So if we're not doing those tasks, we're not going to get there. And it makes you look like a pathetic human being. I'm sorry, I feel that way. I've been in those groups where, I haven't completed my accountability task and I feel like a flippin' loser. It's true.
It is true. And I think it elevates it in the military. The operators, what they're called in special operations, after missions at night, they meet in what they call hot wash, which is really an accountability type meeting. It's a little bit different than what we're talking about, but it is the same, and they do a review. And the point that I want to make about that hot wash is that it's brutally honest. It's protected. It's a protected environment, meaning everybody knows that this doesn't leave this room, but everybody's brutally honest. And I think you need that brutal honesty a lot in life for someone to say, like, hey, Danielle, what the F are you doing? If you don't, it's very clear based on what you said that if you don't do this, then you're not going to make this, or you're not going to be profitable this year. And if you don't do that, what the hell are you doing? I mean, or, yeah, that idea just doesn't sound good. And having that, whether that person's right or wrong, challenging your idea to think further about it, because as a founder, you're in an echo chamber. You become a self-licking ice cream cone. I mean, you do.
True. It's true.
You say, oh, I think this is a great idea. And you can convince yourself that it's a good idea, because as a founder, you have to convince yourself on a regular basis that you can do something that you don't know you can do. And you need someone to say, like, hey, look, that's just not smart. And here's why, because I've already made that mistake 5 times. I'm not saying that you can't figure it out, but here's the challenges that have happened, and you should get off that high horse and start to think about this. And I think that that's basically what you really need. I actually also last night was watching on Netflix the story of the basketball team, USA basketball team, that got the gold medal back, because I think, and I get the years wrong, I think we lost in 2004. We sort of lost our way. And I think 2008 we won it. We got the gold medal back. And the Duke coach, which I am not a fan of, although I respect him because I'm a UNC Tar Heel, and the Tar Heels and Duke have a big rivalry, but they showed footage from that with these elite basketball players. I mean, LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, I keep going down the list here, Carmelo Anthony, and he basically brought them down, broke them down, and took the egos out of it. Not that he's trying to strip their egos, because you have to embrace the egos. It's just having that brutal honesty and accountability, and that's what in that series, the footage, whether you're a basketball fan or not, we really see how he as a coach was able to do that. And in these groups that we're talking about, whether it's a founders group, accountability group, that's what's happening. Mm-hmm. And as much as I sometimes don't want to hear some BS about how I didn't do something, the truth is
you need it.
You'll hear AC/DC in your head and you will make it happen. So
yeah,
I think it's been important through my whole career as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people who get mentors, coaches. You know, I do a lot of small business mentorship in my community as well. But just having that accountability group or some kind of mastermind, you know, again, we don't want to use that word, but any kind of group, you know, there's that famous saying that everybody knows, and it's you become who you hang out with. And I don't care what anybody says, that is 1000% the truth. I've seen it with former friends of mine. I've seen it with business colleagues, partners, things like that. And again, as CEOs, as, you know, founders, things like those positions, you are that self-licking ice cream cone. You constantly have to amp yourself up. Nobody's really telling you, unless it's a pissed off client, nobody's really telling you what you're doing wrong, because not many of your employees or managers are going to come to you and tell you how bad you are at something or how it was a bad idea, because you're ultimately the founder. I mean, good on you if you can take it, but it doesn't really happen. And so if you're in those positions, you need to be around people who are also in those positions, because they are going to make you better. They're not your employees. And I'm not saying that employees are beneath us by any means, but they're not making the decisions that you have to make. So to be around those people in those groups, again, they're making the $1 million revenues. They're making those decisions. They have built a business or a company or a brand. They will make you better. You need to surround yourself with those kinds of people who will make you and challenge you to do better.
Yeah, I was a member, and it just because of COVID stopped. There was a founders group here in Silicon Valley. We met every other Friday in Palo Alto. And the great thing about that group was, one is here in Silicon Valley, and really just the Bay, Silicon Valley is a specific spot that sort of the word has grown to include the whole Bay Peninsula. So I'll just say that as it relates to when I use that term, it's really the whole San Francisco Bay Peninsula area, actually including Oakland as well. There's a lot of big companies in Oakland now. The bar that was in that group was high. The accountability when you went around it was, you felt like you were playing varsity. I mean, you're on the A team, and you get so many ideas from this group. Whereas if you're all with a one-on-one coach, and I've had a one-on-one, I had a sports psychologist that I work with through high school because I had an early injury. I tore my ACL when I was in 7th grade. It was just really hard. There's a lot of mental stuff that you got to go through when you have a major injury like that, and you're trying to play for, back then, the best high school in lacrosse in the country. It's just, you need that. And you don't realize that there's a lot of things in your life that are affecting you. My point with that is that the one-on-one coach is great for some things, and it's great to have that. But again, both you and that coach become a self-licking ice cream cone, and you're only getting ideas from one person versus having a bigger group of ideas. And I think in the founders group that I was a part of, that's what's happened and I'm just bringing this up because you told me before we started recording that you wanted me to talk about the Entrepreneur Dinner Club, which was a club that a group of us in business school I went to UNC Chapel Hill, and we used to get together on Saturday nights. Anybody who was interested in being an entrepreneur or was an entrepreneur, because in business school, it's not as if you're just in college. Some people have already had businesses or already have at least the semblance of a career and an idea maybe that they wanted to do when they graduated. And we met every Saturday night, and it was this group. It was a very hardcore group in the sense that we were serious, we were competitive, and we were honest. Mm-hmm. And if you couldn't take the honesty, then you just opted out. And it wasn't mean. Nobody would tolerate being mean. Mm-hmm. It was simply asking those hard questions. Like, if you have an idea, how are you going to make money? How does that work? Well, how does that work? And the question is 4 layers deep, and we would ask those questions. And turns out of that group, several of us, I would say a large majority, I'd have to go back because the group sort of wax and wanes. There was a core group of us. There's a guy built a $150 million business in 4 years. I built a multi-million-dollar business coming out of there. Wow. Another woman built a multi-million-dollar business out of there. And I'm not saying that it's a direct result of that group or not. But what I am saying is that sort of rigor and accountability on a weekly basis over 2 years in business school really worked. And I carried that out into a group in Easton when I lived there, Easton, Maryland, and started the Entrepreneur Dinner group there. And actually, I think within 3 weeks of starting that, someone got funded who just didn't even think it was possible. That's the thing that comes out of those groups is that this person had a cool business, and it was actually a toy business. And I just think they didn't think that they could raise money or that they could raise money to get their business to the next level. And it happened. That just jumps out at me. There's just, I could keep going down the examples of this, but having a bigger group for me with all of those ideas is just immensely valuable. And in some cases, I've missed it in the sense of having several people. And I think virtually does work, but in person, if you can pull it off at least on every 2 quarters or once a year or twice a year in person, just really changes that dynamic. It turns it up to 11 when you can get into that room for a few hours. So my experience has been immensely useful. Even you and I have been doing episodes. I mean, we started on the other podcast and then we spun out our own show, but even that was accountability. I mean, Coffee with Danielle, it's really how it started was, hey, what's going on this week and what are you doing? And I remember saying like, hey, you said you were going to do that. Or you're like, hey, you told me that this is how it was going. And just having that because you say it in public really makes a big difference. The last thing I'll say is accountability for me has also meant that it's not voluntary, meaning that I paid for it. We did pay fees at the Entrepreneur Dinner Club. They were mouse nuts, but for the other Founders Club, we did pay money that went into someone to run it. There's administration things that have to go on, and you need the administrative things for the accountability. Yeah. Because someone's got to write that stuff down and do all of that stuff. So for me, the payment was more about the commitment. And on the days that I didn't want to show up because I said I'm busy, because I said, hey,
because you made excuses. Yeah.
Well, yeah, whether they're excuses or not. I mean, the truth is we all have things to do in our business. There'll always be excuses. There was always this thing in my mind. I was like, well, I paid $1,200, or in one case, one group called tens of thousands of dollars a year. You're like, yeah, I need to go to that because I paid for it. It's worth it. And it's going to make me better. So it's almost that also increased the motivation for me. So I'm just saying that for people listening who say, well, I never pay for that, or I'm going to do it voluntary. If you take an honest look at things in your life that you got for free versus the things that you paid for, which is your accountability, get back to me and tell me which ones you actually followed through. 1,000%.
I 1,000% agree with you on that. The one group that I did after doing $1 million, we paid, I believe it was $199 a session, so $200 a month. So what's that? $2,400 a year. And just like yourself, there were times where I was tired. I would rather, I had an exhausting day and I didn't really want to sit on Zoom for 2 hours. But I knew that spending that money, I was going to get it back tenfold. And I did. Every single time something got better. So I learned something and I made that money better. And back, like I said, tenfold. And one time I was a part of a group that was before doing the $1 Million Women group. And I think you had to do 500 to 1 million, like 500,000 to 1 million. So it was a smaller niche group. But at that point I was doing around 600,000 and I was struggling, Brandon. And for all of our listeners, I was struggling. I was wearing like 30 hats. I was doing it all myself. And out of every single session that I did with this smaller group, one takeaway that I paid for, and I think that one was $100 a month. So again, for a small revenue group, but very valuable. Everybody was on the same page. Everybody had ideas and things. And one takeaway that I can remember that changed my whole life was I was burnt out. Like I was literally fading away. And I was at this group, I was exhausted. And my biggest challenge was I didn't know what next to do because I didn't have the time. And I had no time. I was working 23 hours a day, barely sleeping. My health was bad. And we've talked about it on the show before when I was doing that because a lot of business owners do. And that was also ran the same way, almost like an accountability. And so I was sharing my challenge. And one of the ladies said, Danielle, you need to write down the tasks that you are doing that are technically not your position. And that really struck with me because I was thinking, well, they're all my position. And she said, what is your title? And my job was to grow the company, not posting on Instagram, not answering emails just about basic things. My job was to get the clients, get the staff at that time. And so she said, you need to write down all of these things that you're doing that are not your job, and you need to then delegate them. And that is when literally and I said at that group, I said my accountability task was to hire an assistant. And I did. 3 weeks later, I hired an assistant 2 days a week, 8 hours a day, and I took that on. And from that point, within like 3 months, I hit my $1 million mark. And from then on, we've grown exponentially just from having an assistant to do 2 days a week to take those tasks on. And I was able to do so much more. So that was something, without that group, I would have never done. I would have just keep burning myself to the ground. Maybe would have never hit $1 million. Who knows?
Yeah, you and I just had an accountability session before we started recording because I tried to convince you that we shouldn't be posting on our website ourselves. And, and you've been resisting for 6 months. But for listeners, it's one of those things where I just learned Danielle and I are very much alike in many ways and probably different in some, is that we always want to take on all those tasks ourselves. We want to do it ourselves. We know we quote, air quotes for those not watching, know that we can do it better. And sometimes you just have to scale. And you and I had that discussion. I'm like, this is not going to work if we scale, if we do another episode a week or we do this. And your thing is, it only takes 10 minutes. And I'm like, well, it's 40 minutes. And my point is only for listeners that you're listening to say that the discussion that Danielle and I are having is not trying to put ourselves in another place or something that it doesn't happen to us. It happens. That's the type of discussions that happen in these groups that people ask, they do ask why questions, but they're really asking what and how.
Yeah.
How does that work? How is it going to work for you, Danielle, to schedule all of your people to clean all these houses and get new customers and do the payroll and it's these how and what questions that come up. And then the how question is, well, how'd you do on that goal that you set for yourself this month? So I think it's, we don't have to beat a dead horse in any way, but I think it's a good discussion. And I think that while this is out there as a known thing for business owners, I think sometimes we forget, me included, because a group fades or something happens. Sometimes these groups, I just had one mastermind, so it was a mastermind marketing group. It just faded. It just didn't work. I guess the people who ran it got tired. No one really wanted to step up because they know how much work it is, and it fades. But it's a good reminder to say, hey, got to find one. You and I, for this episode, it's not that we have a recommendation of one or anything like that. It's more, you got to find one out there that works and try it. And I believe that the ROI on that is huge. It has been for my entire career, and you too. I mean, just saying that you were at 600, you get to 1 million, and now you got several million, whether that group was solely responsible for that or not, hard to say, but
it was the first step, right? That's all it took.
Or the turning on the music when you're riding on the Peloton to basically get you another 100 watts. I mean, that's the point. It starts to bring out the best in you. So.
Well, and for maybe those people listening, and maybe they are almost at 1 million, or maybe over 1 million. I mean, again, there's challenges that people in different revenue tiers, let's just put it that way, are going to experience. And whether you're doing 100,000, 1 million, or 10 million, there's always issues. Like people that think that at 10 million, there's no issues. Trust me, there's that saying where it says more money, more problems. It's 1000% true. The problems just change. And when I transformed or changed into my new group, the $1 Million Woman, my first expansion came from that group. There was a lady there, and she had a business, and she ran like a lawn care business. And she started in just one small community like I did, and she was now a franchise. My motivation to change areas, not franchise, because that's something that I'm not planning on doing just for a quality control reason, and we can get into that on another episode, but getting into other areas and other communities and hiring managers and things and area managers, that all came from that group, because I was like, okay, well, say Orangeville is only at one level that I can reach. Maybe I can only stay at $3 million in Orangeville, but moving to different areas came from my $1 Million Women group a few years ago. So trust me, it does encourage you. It does motivate you. It does take you to the next level, because you're like, well, if she can do it, why can't I do it? And that's where it comes from. So anybody who's listening, I highly encourage getting a part of a group, even if it's just 5, 6, 7 people, get a part of one.
Yeah. And make sure that there's administration. Otherwise it won't run correctly one way or the other. So there you have it. Anything else that you want to cover?
No, I think that's that. Just everybody needs to have accountability. That's not themselves, because we all need accountability.
It's the truth. All right. Well, hey, have a good week.
You too.
Bye, everyone. I'm going to cut this off and come back. So can you? I'm going to stop recording.